Perugia in the times of the Baglionis. In the mid-1400s, Leon Battista Alberti, in an excerpt from the De Re Edificatoria, describes Perugia in its characteristic configuration as an open hand. In the famous city of Perugia, its quarters extend in various directions along the hills, displayed as if they were the fingers of an open hand. This form was conferred to the city starting in the 13th century with the construction of the new walls that doubled the ancient circle of the Etruscan wall, and with the expansion of the 5 hamlets along the roads in a kind of lineal factory. A minute construction made up of houses with cellars and shops, destined for a population of artisans and small shopkeepers. In the higher part of the city, upon the 2 hills, Landone and Del Sole, where once stood the Etruscan Roman city, the rich mercantile families and the noble families of feudal origins had settled with their properties and created an insulae marked by the rising towers. In the second half of the 1200s, the municipal magistrature was consolidated, as well as the organization of local economic activity through the system of the arts or corporations. The city saw the rising of the ancient forum, the Platea Magna, in front of the cathedral that on many occasions hosted the papal court and the seat of the citizens' council. Here, where the principal roads of the ancient Perugia had met, was a symbol of good government and achieved well-being. The most visible of the public municipal works, the Fontana Maggiore, which was finished in 1277 with the building of the powerful Monte Pacciano aqueduct. The religious orders, Franciscans, Dominicans, Augustines, Servites, Carmelites, had instead built their convents in the new building zones, the hamlets which had developed along the royal roads, where in the 13th century mighty churches of the new Gothic style were erected. At the end of the century and throughout the 1300s, the chapels of these churches were embellished with sculptures, funeral monuments, frescoes, paintings, stained glass by artists who developed the teachings of Giotto and the new waves of his school. In the 14th century, the walls followed and were completed. The political organization was cemented in the 1300s with the use of statutes. Thus was born, at the beginning of this century, the magistrature of the priors of the arts, 10 in all, 2 for every district, which represented the nucleus of the new popular political system. The Palatium Communis was enlarged with the building of the priors' residences. The new gateway was built, rich and elaborated, that harkens more executive phases, which, inside the lunette, hosts the images of the city's three protectors, Lorenzo, Costanzo, and Ercolano. Nearby in the Palazzo dei Canonici, in 1294, the seat of the conclave that had elected Pope Celestine V, began the planning of the enlargement of the old Romantic cathedral. Not far from the cathedral, built in 1335, is the oratory of the Maestà delle Volte. Erected to protect and host a precious fresco painted below the facade of the Palazzo del Podestà. Later, along an access road to the city, the church of the Piaggia Colombata was built, in which the small facade is rich with sculptured elements in Gothic style. Ercolano, the patron saint, had a church built with 2 floors in the form of a fortress. Around mid-century, calamitous events such as an epidemic of Black Plague and a few earthquakes, together with internal discords within the city that created 2 opposing factions, the people's Raspanti and the nobles' Beccherini, led the city towards a grave moral, social, and political crisis. Rising up in that period were heads of major corporations of the mercantile and exchange, known as the arti grosse, or the large arts. The first, meeting in the Sala dell'Udienza, or hearing room, taken from the Palazzo Pubblico, or public building, and was entirely covered in wood, where questions of commerce and surveillance on weight and measures were conducted. The second, where the powerful money exchangers met, the bankers of the day. They judged the controversy surrounding these professions. Hospitals were also born, that of Santa Maria della Misericordia on the Piazza del Sopramuro, and the hospital for the poor managed by the Collegio della Mercanzia. The Collegio della Sapienza Vecchia was built, with its magnificent well and chapel, which hosted foreign students coming to Perugia to frequent the studium. Some monasteries used large enclosures. A unique example of mid-14th century architecture, perhaps a project by the Jacobin architect Matteo Gattapone, is that of Santa Giuliana delle Benedettine Cistercensi. New construction came about in the Piazza del Sopramuro, where warehouses and shops were built. The fortress was erected at Porta Sole upon insistence by the pontifical governor, the French Gérard Dupuy, known as l'Abate, or Abbey, di Monmaggiore. It was soon demolished during an uprising. Some remains are left, among which the large support arches and a small decorative element, a hand with ears of corn, emblem of the grain warehouse. Nearby was the Palazzo of Biordo Michelotti, captain of the adventure and the head of the Raspanti clan, which governed the city between 1393 and 1398. The killing of Biordo by the abbot Guidalotti, his brother-in-law, opened the doors to other fleeting attempts to impose a lordship government. Because of the ferocious internal battles and violent conflicts with the papacy at the end of his Avignonese exile, Perugia, fragile and in a state of extreme instability after the Biordo years, underwent 3 alternating lordship regimes. At the beginning of the 1400s, the priors drew up an agreement with the Duke of Milan, Gian Galeazzo Visconti, conferring him with full power over the city. But after their deaths in September 1402, the lords of Milan gave Perugia back to the church. Pope Boniface IX, the Neapolitan Tomacelli, unable to quell the conflict between the 2 citizen factions, opened a road to the brief lords of the King of Naples, the Angioino Ladislao da Durazzo, Lord of Perugia, from 1408 to 1414. The preponderating weakness of the city's magistrates that provoked attacks from a military man, head of a band of mercenaries, Braccio Fortebraccio da Montone, who, having defeated the municipal army at Sant'Egidio, pronounced himself lord of the city, raising again the local aristocracy represented by 12 families. Braccio's lordship also lasted briefly. The condottiere died in June 1424 in the Battle of Aquila. From his death came the quick rise to power of the Baglioni family, of which an exponent, Malatesta di Pandolfo, had married Giacoma, the sister of Braccio da Montone. The city, though caught in the difficulties of a troubled political situation, saw extraordinary artistic initiatives bloom in the early 1400s. The most refined products of international Gothic were placed in the Dominican church. It was embellished by complex cycles of frescoes, such as that of the Orvietan Cola Petruccioli, which ornated the entire tribune, and by the immense stained glass, the largest of the period, made by the Florentine Bartolomeo di Pietro and Mariotto di Nardo. Gentile da Fabriano sent them his precious Madonna. The monks of San Benedetto Novello summoned the painter from Montefeltro, Ottaviano Nelli, to paint frescoes in their church. But most of all, new buildings were constructed in the 2 most prominent parts of the city. Porta Sole, where homes for the new nobility were erected, of the legislators and wealthy commerce brokers, and the Landone Hill, where the Baglionis installed their district. Upon the death of Malatesta Baglioni in 1437, his son Braccio took his place. His military upbringing in the company of Niccolò Piccinino, Braccio, nicknamed Il Magnifico, similarly followed in the footsteps of Federico da Montefeltro, together with whom he participated in many military campaigns. Able at gaining the trust of popes, in 1459 he hosted the humanist Pope Pius II Piccolomini in Perugia. Bounded by friendship with the Medici family in Florence and with the da Varano family from Camerino, he knew how to gain support from many other lords of the period. Borso d'Este, heading for Rome to receive the title of Duke, made a stop in Perugia in 1471. Above all, Braccio was a great organizer of culture and local pomp, through grand feasts and tournaments, often dedicated to the beloved Margherita Montesperelli, with whom he had a long relationship, as well as the embellishment of his homes, where he summoned Domenico Veneziano from Florence to fresco a cycle of illustrious men. As with all new lords trying to legitimize their power, often obtained by force and reckless marriage strategies, Braccio wanted to demonstrate his wisdom, justice, and magnificence. As such, a determining role was played by the intellectuals who often worked as secretaries, chancellors, ambassadors, and chronicled court life. He therefore summoned to the studium of Perugia celebrated humanists such as Francesco Maturanzio, who was owed the planning of the decoration of the Sala dell'Udienza in the Collegio del Cambio, where, with the celebration of illustrious men, the virtue of the ancients are exalted, such as exempla for the new lords. The new art of typography is promoted, starting in 1470 by the Cartolaris, but, above all, it was the architectural renewal of Perugia that characterized the decades near the mid-1400s. One only needs to observe the construction fervor that determined the building of the bell tower in the Abbey of San Pietro, the construction of the new cathedral by the local architect Bartolomeo di Mattiolo da Torgiano, and by summoning, as in Rome, of Florentine architects such as Agostino de Duccio, having just finished together with l'Alberti at the Tempio Malatestiano di Rimini for the construction and sculptured decoration. From 1457 to 1461, the Oratory of San Bernardino, one of the most delicate and inventive works of the early Renaissance. Later on, Agostino was called upon to build the Porta San Pietro between 1472 and 1473, and still again for the ornate sculpture of the Maestà delle Volte. One can understand that here too, as in other parts, in the crowded tangle of the medieval city, a series of interventions tending to bring measured order and rationale were realized, in line with the principles of humanistic architecture. At the end of the 1460s, in the monastery of Sant'Antonio, where Ilaria, daughter of Braccio Baglioni, was minister, came the greatest painter of the day to Perugia, Piero della Francesca. Braccio, in the last decade of his life, enjoyed the support of Francesco delle Rovere, who became pope with the name Sixtus IV, and had to face family rivalry and blood feuds. In May 1477, in the Piazza of Perugia, he killed his cousin Rodolfo and Rodolfo's son Francesco, shortly thereafter succumbing to revenge by this branch of the family, who also killed his only son, Grifone. Braccio died in 1479 and was buried in San Francesco al Prato. His sarcophagus is now found in the church of Santa Maria Nuova. After the death of Braccio, the internal struggles became even more ferocious, culminating upon the occasion of the wedding between Astorre Baglioni and Lavinia Colonna in a bloody feud known throughout history as the Red Wedding or the Blood Wedding. In the night between the 14th and 15th of July 1500, the Baglioni residences were attacked and the lords of Perugia were massacred in a bloody and obscure atmosphere. To commemorate the death of Grifonetto, Braccio's nephew, dragged into conspiracy by the family rivalry, his mother Atalanta commissioned a painting for the church of San Francesco al Prato, a transport of Christ to the sepulchre, which was painted by Raffaello in 1507, known in history by the name of Palla Baglioni. Oscar Wilde, in The Portrait of Dorian Gray, writes, "Grifonetto Baglioni, with his quilted vest, the gemmed beret and curls shaped like acanthus, who killed Astorre with his bride, and Simonetto with his page, and who was so beautiful that when he lay dying in the yellow square of Perugia, with those who hated him, could not withhold their tears, and Atalanta, who had cursed him, had blessed him." Other women of the family were responsible for some of the more illustrious artistic commissions of the 14 and 1500s. In the early 1500s, Ilaria, in the Margherita century, Braccio and Toderina Fieschi's first daughter, who already 30 years before had turned to Piero della Francesca, had commissioned the Palla Colonna by Raffaello for the Sant'Antonio Monastery, where she was abbess, whereas her younger sister, Alessandra, or Leandra, wife of an Oddi, had commissioned the coronation for the family chapel at San Francesco al Prato. After the night of the conspiracy, Giampaolo Baglioni, one of Rodolfo's sons, a valid man of arms at the service of the Florentines and Venetians, found himself unquestionably the leader of the family. He cared particularly for the estates outside Perugia, in that vast lordship formed from the period of Malatesta Baglioni at the end of the 1300s, and which extended along the Valle Umbra to Torgiano, Bettona, their stem is on the wall of the ancient parish of San Quirico, and most of all Spello. In the insidious years of Alexander VI Borgia's pontificate, Giampaolo placed his troops at the service of Alexander's son Cesare, Il Valentino. His brother, Troilo, apostolic proto-notary and prior to the collegiate of Santa Maria Maggiore at Spello, wanted to produce in that church a cycle of frescoes by the Perugian painter Bernardino di Betto, known as Pintoricchio. It is the Cappella Bella, the most splendid work of art commissioned by the Baglioni family. In 1501, Troilo became Bishop of Perugia, but in 1503 he entered into conflict with Valentino and was forced, together with his brother, to leave the city and find refuge elsewhere. In the early decades of the 1500s, irremediable fractures and bloody contrasts persisted within the family, contributing to the fall of the family's dominion, destined to fade definitively, crushed by pontifical power and the excommunication inflicted by Pope Paul III Farnese. From the ruinous Salt War followed the construction in 1540 of the Paolina fortress. The entire Baglioni district, the streets and the squares where their towers stood, the churches and the fountains of the Landone Hill were not destroyed but imprisoned in the subterranean areas of the mighty fortress planned by Antonio da San Gallo il Giovane, an edifice respectful in a way of the existing one, but greatly vast and impending, to completely redesign the heart of the Terra Vecchia, or Old Land of Perugia, superimposing the medieval structure to the foreign and enemy bulk of the Farnesian fortress. As such, in the mid-1500s, one could say the role of the third strength had exhausted itself between the papacy and the citizens' autonomy, covered for almost 2 centuries by the Baglioni family, and the definitive decline of the dream of a lordship who, in fact, had remained incomplete.